Hey guys, I'm Ashish and today we'll be continuing with our third part of Max Weber session. And if you have not watched the first two parts, I would request you to please do that. Links for the same would be in the description of this video. So getting on with it, today we'll be dealing with criticisms of Weber's bureaucracy model. We have dealt in depth with the ideal type model of Max Weber and today we'll be dealing with the criticisms. So basically, as you can see, the Weberian model of bureaucracy has attracted criticism mainly on 3 points. The first point that his model is criticized on is rationality. The second point that his model is criticized on is suitability of Weberian model to administrative requirements of different places and changing times, how adaptive it is to different countries and different decades and different years. So adaptability and suitability to different places and different times is the second main criticism that the model is criticized on, and the third main criticism that the model attracts is whether the model can attain maximum efficiency as visualized by Weber. So basically Weber has said that his model of bureaucracy is the most efficient. So is his model really that efficient? That is the third main criticism that Weber's model attracts. Moving on. So basically in this section we'll deal about some of the main persons as critics and some general criticisms. So we'll be dealing with 8 or 9 main critics of Weber. Now you do not have to remember the names of each and every critic of Weber, just try to understand what they have said, because what UPSC is trying to do in recent years is they quote a statement by some of the critic of some great thinker and they ask you to analyze that statement. So basically you do not have to remember the names of those critics because the name of that critic will be specified in that question. What you have to do is just analyze the statement. So please pay close attention to this, and if you can remember one or two big names of critics, it will be very good, because when you are writing a general criticism, if in exam, it comes in handy to write the names of one or two big critics, right? So if you can remember one or two big names, it is good for your preparation. So moving on with our critics, first critic that we will learn about is Robert Merton. Robert Merton was a great critic of Max Weber, who questioned the rationality of Weber's model. He said that the rational model that Weber gives can produce certain dysfunctional consequences, some consequences which were not anticipated by Weber and which can hamper the functioning of the organization. So such dysfunctional consequences can be a byproduct of Weberian model. This is what Robert Merton says. He says that the structure, especially its hierarchy and the rules, the structure as a whole, which is rational in Weber's sense, can easily generate consequences. For example, development of vested interest by the bureaucracy. We have seen this, that bureaucrats have this tendency to appropriate the position to themselves, to assume too much power to themselves. So it is the same thing that Robert Merton says, that what Weber thought was rational can give some unanticipated consequences which are unexpected. You do not expect them, you do not anticipate them, so these are unexpected and detrimental to the attainment of objectives of organization. Adherence to rules, originally conceived as a means, becomes an end in itself. Now we have seen this statement by Robert Merton in one of the elements of the ideal type bureaucracy when we were studying. The second element was rules, and we have seen this very same statement of Robert Merton over there, that adherence to rules becomes an end in itself which was originally conceived to be a means. There occurs a familiar process of displacement of goals whereby an instrumental value becomes a terminal value. Rules become more important than game. He also opined that rigid rule orientation leads to trained incapacity. Now what is trained incapacity? It means your abilities function as your blind spots. It means that people's past experience or training or education can lead to wrong decisions when circumstances change. So basically you are a trained person, you are a literate person, you know how to handle things, but your literacy or your training or your past experience or education can itself be an obstacle in your execution of functions. You can get biased by your past experiences. You can develop a particular habit of doing things in a particular way and you might not want to change them. So this makes you incapable of handling things in a new modern system, right? So you are basically trained person but still you are incapable. This is nothing but trained incapacity. Your past experience and your past education and abilities themselves become your own blind spots. So Robert Merton says that Weber's model can lead to trained incapacity because there is so much of adherence to rules, so much of adherence to principles that Weber has laid down. You can basically become incapable in spite of being trained. So the second critic we'll learn about is Philipp Selznick. He says that division of work in an organization can create subunits, and these subunits can set up goals of their own, sometimes conflicting with the organization as a whole. So basically when you are dividing work, you are basically creating subunits, and what Philipp says is these subunits can set up goals of their own which can conflict with the goals of the organization. He suggests that remedy for this is better coordination between subunits and not setting up of new departments. You should not go on setting up of new subunits and new departments. Better coordination is the remedy for this. Weberian model is insufficient in describing how bureaucrats will in fact behave, because the officials have their own characteristics as social beings beyond those which the administrative code specifies. So basically everyone is a social being, everyone has a society to respond to, right? So everyone responds to society in a different way. So Weberian model does not consider this factor, does not consider the factor of society. So what Weberian model is insufficient in describing how bureaucrats will in fact behave. He also criticized Weberian model for its neglect of the power which a bureaucrat assumes. So basically he says that what the power a bureaucrat can assume, Weberian model neglects this, whereby he becomes increasingly preoccupied with his own social position. So basically he brings in his own self-interest into play. This scenario was neglected by Weber. This is what Philipp Selznick says. So moving on to our next critic, we'll learn about Talcott Parsons. He questioned the internal consistency of the Weberian model itself. What he says is Weber expects the administrative staff to be technically superior as well as possess the right to give orders, but this itself gives rise to conflicts within bureaucracy, since it is not always possible to ensure that high position in hierarchy of authority will be matched by equivalent professional skill. What this means is, if you are a manager, it does not necessarily make you technically competent to be a manager. If you are good at giving orders, it does not mean that you are technically sound. And it happens, this is a real life scenario. Sometimes managers can give you orders, but they themselves do not know too much about the topic they are giving order on. And this is what Talcott Parsons also says. He says that Weber expects the administrative staff to be technically superior as well as possess the right to give orders. But in real life, it does not happen so, because sometimes you might have the right to give orders, but you might not be technically superior. This is what this point means. In such cases, when that happens, the individuals working in an organization will face the problem of whom to obey, the person with the right to command or the man with a greater expertise. So basically who to follow, that will be the problem of the subordinates of that person. This is the criticism as given by Talcott Parsons. The next critic is Herbert Simon. In his administrative behavior, this work was given by Herbert Simon in 1945. He maintained that variety of circumstances need varied bureaucratic structures, and the so-called timeless principles of Weberian model of administration cannot suit to the ever-changing circumstances of today's modern world. So basically what Weber said is timeless principles and can be applied in any time at any place. Herbert Simon says that this is not so, this is not true. In today's modern world, Weber's principles do not hold so much value and so much ground because the circumstances have changed, and these changed circumstances need changed bureaucratic structures. This is what Herbert Simon says. Next critic is Alvin Gold. He opined that the promulgation of additional rules as a central mechanism produces tension between the managers and the subordinates, leading to the displacement of organizational goals. So if you are making new rules in a structure of bureaucracy, these promulgation of additional rules and new rules as a central mechanism, this produces tension between the managers and subordinates, because there are now additional rules being sprung upon every now and then. So new tensions create between managers and subordinates, and this leads to displacement of organizational goals. The subordinates will lose their focus from the organizational goals. Alvin distinguishes two major types of bureaucracies and analyzed why people comply with bureaucracy. The first major type of bureaucracy, he says, is punishment centered bureaucracy, where members of the organization conform reluctantly to rules which they consider are imposed on them by an alien group. And the second, he says, is the representative bureaucracy, where the members regard rules as necessary on technical grounds and their own interest. So what Alvin Gold says is, whichever bureaucracy you take in the world, it will be one of the two kinds. Either it will be punishment centered or either it will be representative. What is punishment centered is, the members of that bureaucracy do not want to actually follow rules, but they reluctantly do so, considering that these rules are imposed on them. So they basically do not want to follow rules. They think that these rules are punishment on them. So this is the one kind of bureaucracy that Alvin says, punishment centered bureaucracy. And the second type, he says, is representative bureaucracy, where members willingly follow follow the rules. They think that rules are necessary on technical grounds and in their own interest. These rules are necessary. So this is the criticism by Alvin Gold. Next critic we'll learn about is Peter Blau. What Peter Blau said was Weberian model cannot be applied to administrations of different times and places. So basically, as times evolve and as countries change, as nations change, the Weberian model cannot be applied to the same extent as Weber said it can be applied. Blau felt that a fresh look has to be taken at the concept of rational administration. We need a fresh look at this concept. In a changing environment, the attainment of organizational objectives depend on perpetual change in the bureaucratic structure. So when the environment as a whole is changing, when there are new changes in the society happening, you need to change the bureaucratic structure also, and that is how you will attain the organizational objectives, the organizational goals. Without changing the structure in changing times, you cannot attain the organizational goals. This is what Peter Blau says. In a changing environment, the attainment of organizational objectives depend on perpetual change in the bureaucratic structure. That is why efficiency cannot be guaranteed by tethering the official to a set of rigid rules. So you need to change. Being static will not help. You need to be dynamic. Limiting yourself to a set of rigid rules will not help. The bureaucratic structure should undergo change in changing environment. Efficient administration is possible only when an individual is allowed to identify with the purposes of the organization and to adopt his behavior to his perception of changing circumstances. So basically, if administration has to be made efficient, two things have to be made sure, and these two things are: first, the person should himself identify with the organization, and second thing, he should adopt his own behavior according to his perception of changing environment. This is what Peter Blau says. The next critic is H.C. Creel and A.B. Spitzer. This pair of critics took objection to Weber's claim that rational bureaucracy is a modern phenomenon. Creel, for instance, asserted that almost all characteristics of Weberian model existed in China by 200 BC. So even back then in China, Weberian model existed. So Weberian rational model is not a modern phenomenon as Weber claims it is. Spitzer considers that the function of the 19th century French prefect means administrator. So the 19th century French prefect are far more comprehensive than those attributed to Weber's bureaucrat. So even the French prefect was more comprehensive than what bureaucrat Weber suggested. This is what this pair of critics suggested, H.C. Creel and A.B. Spitzer. Simon and March are the next pair of critics. They questioned the efficiency of Weber's model. They said that Weber neglected the human behavior in an organization. Maximum efficiency in the organization cannot be achieved by emphasizing on mere structure of bureaucracy without regard to its behavior. So you need to consider behavior. Now remember this, Herbert Simon was a behavioralist, right? We have learnt about what behavioralists are in our first modules. So what Herbert Simon criticized is you need to consider the behavior, you need to consider the human side of the organization if you need to attain maximum efficiency, otherwise efficiency cannot be achieved. So moving on. Our next critic is Klaus of A, and this is one of the most important critics because he is most recent critic to come out. Now pay attention to this because UPSC is really unpredictable. As we have already seen, UPSC asks some really weird questions based on anyone's statement. So Klaus of A actually criticized Weber on a very technical level. He gave some very technical criticism, so please pay close attention to this. And to give you a background, Klaus of A is actually a German scholar and he belongs to the critical theory scholars. We have learned about Jürgen Habermas. If you remember, in critical theory we did not learn about Klaus of A over there because it was not necessary, because Klaus of A has basically criticized Weberian model and we had not learned Weberian model back then, so it did not seem relevant to include Klaus of A in critical theory part. We'll study Klaus of A over here. In recent times, a very incisive comment on Weberian model has been made by Klaus of A. He gives us two types of rationalities. We have already seen what rational decision making is, right? I have told you what rational decision making means. So Klaus of A says there are two type of rationalities. First is the rule-bound bureaucracy means that the premises of action are not at the disposal of the actors themselves. All that is needed is to blindly and mechanically apply the legal norms to specific situations. This kind of bureaucratic rationality of A calls organizational rationality. So first kind is organizational rationality, and he says that organizational rationality means blindly applying rules. You do not have to apply your own brain. This is what organizational rationality means. There are some predefined and well written rules and you have to just apply those rules in certain conditions and situations. So whatever rational decision you are making on predefined and well established rules and principles. This is what organizational rationality is. Blindly and mechanically applying legal norms in specific situations without applying applying your brain. This is the first kind of rationality. The second type of rationality, what Offe calls, is systemic rationality. It refers to the bureaucratic fulfillment of functional requirements of their social environment. So every bureaucrat and every administrator is a human being. He lives in a society. So sometimes what happens is, when you are making a rational decision, you undertake the societal factors, the conditions of your surrounding environment. You consider these factors and then you come to a rational decision. And if you arrive to a rational decision based on these societal and dynamic factors and not on pre-established and well-written rules, this kind of rationality Offe calls systemic rationality. What Offe says is, under conditions of developed welfare state capitalism, the rationality of bureaucratic action does not guarantee but perhaps conflicts with the functional rationality of the political system. So basically the political systems or the politicians themselves will have some rationality to them, and the bureaucratic system will also have some rationality to them. So these two kinds of rationality, the bureaucratic rationality and the political rationality, do not go hand in hand in a welfare state capitalism. This is what Offe says, and this is important because this is relevant to third world countries. We'll see that in our next point, but basically for now understand that what politicians consider as rational might not be in tune with what bureaucrats consider as rational. So in a welfare state capitalism, the rationality of bureaucratic action does not guarantee but perhaps conflicts with the functional rationality of the political system. However, he points out that under exceptional circumstances, when societal conditions permit the highest degree of unrestricted application of rules, the two criteria of rationality may be congruent. So when your societal conditions are as such, the environment is as such that the environment permits you to use the rules in an unrestricted way, to use the rules in however way you like. You know, the societal conditions permit the highest degree of unrestricted application of rules. So you can use rules how much ever you like, in whatever way you like. This is how societal conditions are. In such exceptional circumstances, when such exceptional circumstances do occur, it is possible that the two criteria of rationality might be congruent. But this kind of determinate administrative action tends to freeze administrative autonomy. You lose autonomy to make decisions. Whenever these organizational and systematic rationality do become congruent, you basically lose autonomy in such exceptional circumstances. Now, Offe's comment has considerable relevance for third world countries. How we'll see. The rule-bound bureaucratic system in a developing country is thus incompatible with the many-faceted and complex task of socio-economic development. Because in a developing country, in a third world country, there is too much of socio-economic development that has to happen, which has not happened yet. So the society as a whole is dynamic, right? The environment keeps on changing. So systemic rationality and organizational rationality, these two types of rationality do not go hand in hand. The rule-bound bureaucratic system is not in tune with the socio-economic development, because these two kinds of rationality do not go in tune. I hope you understand this. The organizational rationality and systemic rationality will be at loggerheads, basically what we have studied now, in a situation of speedy social reconstruction. Because the society is changing as a whole, the social reconstruction is happening, the systemic rationality will not be in tune with the organizational rationality. Most post-colonial societies are faced with this dilemma, and any attempts to innovate new modes of administration is often frustrated by bureaucratic dominance. So basically in such countries, if you finally try to apply this Weberian model, what will happen is bureaucratic dominance will happen. This is the dilemma of most of the post-colonial society. This is what Klaus of A says. The kind of systemic rationality that Offe has in mind will have its source in societal expectations of programs, and results will be the main motor of government policy action. So what systemic rationality Offe talks about is nothing but going in tune with the changing needs of the society, the dynamic nature of the environment that you are in. If you are making a decision based on those dynamic factors, that is what Offe calls his systemic rationality. So I hope you understand the criticism given by Klaus of A. This is actually important. Now UPSC might not ask Klaus of A ever in any of the exam, but it's still important to study this, because if ever they give you these terms in question, organizational rationality and systemic rationality, please do remember what they mean, and I hope you will be able to write the answer now. So moving on, we'll learn about some general criticisms. We are done with particular persons and particular critics. We'll deal with some general criticisms now. So the first general criticism is the Parkinson's Law. What Parkinson's Law is, it is named after historian C. Northcote Parkinson, and it states that work creates more work, usually to the point of filling the time available for its completion. That is, the organization swells each year by creating artificial work. So basically all the managers, all the bureaucrats create artificial work for themselves. New paperwork are being filed, new programs are being initialized. So basically you are creating artificial work for yourself just to fill your time available with you. So this is what Parkinson's Law is. Organization swells each year by creating artificial work. Remember this, Parkinson's Law is very important, not only for public administration but also from the point of view of polity. Parkinson's Law is also an important part of your Indian polity. It is an application based question in Indian polity, so please understand this. Parkinson believed that bureaucracies always grow typically by 5 to 6% annually. It is an empire building tendency within the bureaucracy. Managers wish to appear busy, so they increase their workload by creating paper and rules, filling out evaluation and forms, and filing. Then they hire more assistants, who in turn require more of managerial time for supervision. So basically this is how they create artificial work. I hope you understand now. Managers, they wish to appear busy, and this is why they create artificial work, and this is what Parkinson said, and this is nothing but Parkinson's Law. According to Parkinson, bureaucracies grow stupider by each year. Another is incompatible with development administration. This is nothing but the third world countries, the developing countries. For example, India has a development administration in itself, right? So Weberian model is incompatible with development administration. We'll see how. First criticism is based on the sphere of competence. Strict adherence to rules results in delay and inefficiency in the administration. We have already seen this, that if you apply too much of rules and principles, basically the process gets delayed. Development administration throws multifarious new challenges, and the administrator can only justify his service by meeting them, rather than wait to get the clarification from superiors whether a particular new situation falls under his competence or not. So new situations keep arising in developing countries. The society as a whole is changing, right? So new situations keep arising, and for example, if one such new situation arises, what the rule says, you should ask your supervisor whether this new situation is within your competence or not, whether you can handle this new situation or not. These are the rules. This is what rule says. But basically what should actually happen is, bureaucrats should handle these new situations without confirming with their supervisors. This is how you will eliminate delay. But Weberian model instead results in delay and inefficiency, because too much of adherence to rule is there, and sphere of competence. This is what sphere of competence criticism is, whether the new situation falls within your sphere of competence or not. This is what gives rise to delay. Adherence to rigid hierarchy leads to authoritarianism in the organization. Now we all know what hierarchy is. Hierarchy means a top-down model, a scalar chain of superiors that runs from the lower level to the higher level. So if you adhere to too much of hierarchy in an organization, basically the organization might become Hitler-like or authoritarian. There is a loss of mutual trust within employees, and loss of interpersonal relations also. There is a loss of autonomy also. So basically you become more of authoritarian nature if you follow too much of hierarchy. Weber's insistence on records leads to too much formalism in administration. The expert drowned in files becomes a glorified clerk. Negative effect on welfare commitment. What Weber says is, you should have everything in writing, and whatever you do every day, that should also be recorded. So this basically is too much of formalisms, too much of writing down, too much of rules, and too much of recording is happening here. So what is happening actually is, the expert who is supposed to handle some situation, he now gets drowned in files, and he basically becomes a glorified clerk, and this has a negative effect on welfare commitment. The welfare programs and policies get delayed because of too much of writing down. So this is how Weberian model is incompatible with development administration. Moving on. Bentham's dog law is another general criticism about Weber's bureaucracy. What Bentham's dog law is, Weber's bureaucracy is referred to as Bentham's dog law. Jeremy Bentham is a liberal reformer of 19th century, and this is where dog law concept came from. Jeremy Bentham, he called the criminal laws of the UK as dog law because it condemned the offenders after the event has taken place, in much the same way that owners punish their dogs after they have erred. Bentham believed that such laws do not have any detrimental values. So during his time, during the time of Jeremy Bentham, Bentham said that the criminal laws of UK or Britain are same as dog law. For example, when a dog does some error, you punish him after he has done some error, right? So that does not have any detrimental value on dogs. This is how the criminal laws of UK are. This is what Jeremy Bentham said during his time, and he gave this concept of dog law. And Bentham's dog law is now applied as a criticism to Weber's bureaucracy model. I hope you understand this. state is expected to be proactive and not reactive. So you should not be reactive. You should not be reacting after something has already happened. You should be proactive. You should anticipate something that this will happen in future, and you should take corrective steps to avoid such situation in future. So state is expected to be proactive and not reactive. Rather than making the people aware of the laws, that is proactive measures, bureaucracy relies on punishment to maintain the law. So basically you should be making people aware of the laws. You should be making people more known of the laws that exist. This is what is proactive measure. This is how bureaucracy should work. Bureaucracy should work proactively, but basically how bureaucracy works today is it works on punishment to maintain the law. This should not be the case. This is what Bentham's dog law means. Another criticism is criticism of ideal type of bureaucracy. Carl Friedrich says the words ideal and type under Weber's ideal type of bureaucracy cancel each other. So basically Weber himself said that my model is an ideal type of bureaucracy. So Carl Friedrich says that the words ideal and type actually cancel each other. They do not mean anything. These are useless words. Ideal and type, they do not go together. They actually cancel each other. This is another criticism. So basically we are done with all the criticisms. We'll deal with now defense of Weber's model and relevance of Weber's model in today's times. So going ahead with that, in defense of Weber, we'll say that Weberian model provides reliability, stability and precision. So criticize how much ever you like, but still Weberian model gives you reliability, stability and precision. His emphasis on documentation helps build up institutional memory. Just because Weber has said that everything should be written, this is what builds up institutional memory. You can go back and refer to any of the function that you have executed in the past. So basically you are creating a history of your actions. An institutional memory is being created because of Weber's emphasis on documentation. Dysfunctional consequences mentioned by Merton are largely attitudinal in nature. Now when we studied Robert Merton's criticism, we have studied that he said Weber's model gives us some unexpected consequences, right? And these unexpected consequences are bureaucrats assuming too much power to themselves. So these kind of criticisms are largely attitudinal in nature. It depends on attitude to attitude of person to person. So basically you cannot generalize this criticism for the whole model. If you employ good people, this criticism might not arise even. So basically these consequences which Robert Merton has mentioned, these are largely attitudinal in nature. These are largely depending on the persons who are acting as bureaucrats. Weber was able to realize that bureaucracy was a threat to democracy. We have seen this, that Weber gave us limits on bureaucracy, on how to control the power assuming feature of bureaucracy. We have seen this. So Weber was aware of this fact that bureaucrats assume power to themselves. So Weber was able to realize this thing. So you cannot criticize him on this fact. You cannot say that bureaucrats assume too much power. Weber himself said that I know bureaucrats assume too much power and this is what you should do to limit that assuming power. So this is what we can say in defense of Weber. Weber constructed his model with respect to the conditions of Germany of his times. We have seen how unification of Germany under Bismarck happened, how he related capitalism with Protestantism. So he constructed his model with respect to conditions of Germany of his times. It is wrong to say that it does not suit the modern conditions. At the start of 20th century, nobody, including Weber, could have ever visualized the changes that have come about in last 5 to 6 decades. So what last 5 to 6 decades have brought in? They have brought in liberalization, privatization, globalization. And at the start of 20th century, when Weber gave his model, he could not have visualized these things. So he gave his model with respect to conditions of Germany of his times. So saying that his model does not apply today, his model is irrelevant in today's times, it is wrong to say. We should not say this because we are quoting Weber out of context. Weberian model is in context of Germany of his times. So in defense of Weber we can say this. As observed by Martin Elbrow gave something in defense of Weber. He says that Weber in his German writings would have used the words rationality and efficiency in different contexts. Moreover, Weber might not have visualized all the meanings attached to the English word efficiency, because we now in today's time know what rationality is and what efficiency actually is, and we assume too much when we read the word efficiency. Weber in his times might not have assumed so much as we assume so much about the word efficiency and rationality. This is what Martin Elbrow says. Weberian model includes both positive and negative elements. Positive elements are merit-based selection, no appropriation of official positions by incumbents. So you should not use official property for your own self-use. You should not appropriate the official position. There should be a merit-based selection. These are all positive elements. And the negative elements are impersonal order, rules, fear of competence, hierarchy, technical rules, written documents. These are all negative elements of Weberian model. What happened is, as the negative elements is given greater weightage in the model, the positive elements get gulfed and enfeebled by the huge stream of negativism. So basically Weber had handled both positive and negative aspects, and since he gave more focus to negative aspects, what critics say that Weber's model is actually negative negative. They criticize on rules, they criticize on impersonal order, they criticize on sphere of competence, too much of sphere of competence. We have seen these criticisms, right? But Weber actually dealt with positive elements also, like merit-based selection and no appropriation of official position. And if you will see, no one has criticized over positive elements because these are positive elements. What has happened is Weber gave too much of weightage to negative elements in his writing of his ideal type bureaucracy model. So while reading Weber's model, we should consider positive elements also. This is what we can say in defense of Weber. Now we'll see how relevant Weber's model is in today's times. So in spite of criticism from several scholars, the ideas of Weber on bureaucracy continue to be relevant to understand the present administrative system. So far we have not been able to evolve an alternative model to Weber's bureaucracy. So how much ever you criticize, say whatever you feel like about it, but we have not been able to evolve an alternative model. This fact remains. Weber was criticized for his formalism, but as Martin Albro has said, the formal rationality has increased manifold in the present day administration thanks to the advancement of management techniques. Thus, his formal model is ideal even for today. So basically we say that Weber's model adheres too much to rules and too much of formality is there, too much of written documents and everything. But what Martin Albro has said that this formalism is actually present in today's times also. So you cannot say that Weber's model is too formal. Even today's organizations are too formal, so basically Weber's model is relevant even today. Weber is right in saying that when we are accustomed to the bureaucracy, we cannot think of any other alternative. We have seen this in our previous session, right? Weber has said this, that when any person gets accustomed to bureaucracy, we cannot think of any other alternative. Today, we see in practice this to be correct. The Afro-Asian countries, including India, whoever gained independence after the decolonization happened after Second World War, these Afro-Asian countries, including India itself, could get rid of the alien rule. They threw away their colonizers, they threw away the British rule, right? They could get rid of alien rule, but they could not get rid of the bureaucratic practices established by these colonial rulers. So what basically happens is when you are accustomed to bureaucracy, you cannot think of any other alternative. You try to maintain that. This is the beauty of a bureaucratic structure. So this is how bureaucratic structure is relevant even today. It becomes your habit. His ideas on selection of officers based on qualifications, utility of written documents in administration, hierarchy, etc. can be seen in administration of the present day itself. So merit-based selection, we are seeing this everywhere. We do not need any example for this. We are seeing merit-based selection everywhere in every walk of life in today's world, right? So his ideas of merit-based selection hold true even today. Utility of written documents. What is the utility of written documents? You can now, as a aware citizen, ask for these documents as a right to information, right? So utility of these written documents are there even today's times. Even in India, if you see RTI applications and all, utility of written documents is there. Hierarchy is also important, and all these things cannot be done away with. So Weber's model is actually relevant even today. Those who criticize Weberian model are not criticizing Weber, but the present day bureaucracies which more or less reflect the model. Talks these days are of debureaucratization or less of bureaucracy, and these talks are nothing but idealistic talks. What happens is, how much ever you talk about debureaucratization and less of bureaucracy, you cannot avoid bureaucracy. You can just make less of bureaucracy. You can just debureaucratize. You cannot completely avoid bureaucracy. So this is how relevant Weber's model is today. Even those who criticize Weberian model, they are actually criticizing present day bureaucracies who are becoming too much of bureaucratized, right? Parkinsons Law, if you remember. So they are actually criticizing today's bureaucracies, and they are not actually criticizing Weberian model. Even those who argue for debureaucratization cannot proceed further without understanding the Weberian analysis. So you have to analyze Weber's model if you have to even debureaucratize. So this is how relevant it is. Now, whether it is a capitalist society or a socialist society, irrespective of the nature of economy, we find the bureaucracy playing a very important role. Even in China there is a bureaucracy, even in USA there is a bureaucracy. So if it is a capitalist society or a socialist society, whatever type of society you are living in, bureaucracy always plays an important role. This is how relevant it is. Even in present context of liberalization and privatization, there is a wave of LPG, right? Liberalization, privatization, globalization. Even in these present context it is relevant. How we'll see. We cannot think of the implementation of the welfare and development programs without the help of bureaucracy. So if you have to develop your country, if you have to be a welfare state, bureaucracy is needed. This is how important bureaucracy is in today's times of liberalization and privatization. The voluntary organizations that come up in the wake of liberalization and privatization, these voluntary organizations and other forms of people's organization can only supplement the bureaucracy, but they cannot substitute the bureaucracy. You can only supplement it, you can only make it better, you cannot substitute it. relevant. In the construct of developing countries, people look to bureaucracy for their day-to-day requirements. So basically this means is how much ever you criticize, bureaucracy is relevant even today, be it capitalist society or a socialist society, be it a liberalized era or a privatized era, whatever be it. For example, so many programs are there. For example, in India, Pradhan Mantri ye kar lo yojana, Pradhan Mantri wo kar lo yojana, all of these yojanas are irrelevant if you are not helped by the bureaucracy. तो अगर कोई भी योजना चलानी है तो bureaucracy आपको चाहिए. This is how relevant bureaucracy is in today's times. Hence the bureaucracy of Weber and type continues to find its relevance even today. So with this we have finished our criticism and relevance section. In next session we will deal with post-Weberian developments. This is a part of your UPSC syllabus also. Hope to see you soon in my next session. Peace out.